At holiday lunch, my mother ordered me to stop relying on my family. I quietly packed my things and showed them how important I was. You know, there are moments in life that just shatter you. For me, it happened over a festive holiday lunch when my own mother looked me dead in the eye and told me to stop relying on my family. The brutal irony? I was the one secretly propping up their entire lives. In the middle of the holiday lunch, amidst the clinking forks and what felt like 100 phony smiles, Mom delivered a stern order completely out of the blue. No warning, no argument, just a direct command, as if I hadn't just finished helping serve everyone, and as if I hadn't been covertly funding almost everything that kept that family afloat. She told me to quit depending on them. The room went absolutely silent. A chill, heavy and thick, settled over everything. And then, the quiet. Nobody, not a single soul, stood up for me. Not my brothers, not my father. Something inside of me snapped in that moment, but it wasn't rage. It was a searing, crystal clear clarity. Because they were about to discover exactly how mistaken they'd been and the brutal consequences of that error if they truly believed I depended on them. I didn't storm out immediately. I sat there for a while, letting the warmth of the dining room lights envelop me. They felt just like they did when I was a child, before I realized the truth those pretty lights were hiding. From the outside, my family appeared to be the epitome of holiday tradition. You know, carved ham, ornamental wreaths, genuine laughter. But growing up inside those walls, if you listened closely enough, taught you about every flaw in the paint, every subtle shift in tone, every silence that held a deeper, darker meaning than the words that preceded it. My name is Evelyn. I'm 36, and for most of my life, I truly believe that if I just worked hard enough, showed up enough, proved myself enough, I'd finally earn a seat at that table that didn't feel conditional. At work, I lead teams, manage timelines, craft strategies. I'm respected, but at home, I was always the sister who was too accomplished, the daughter who was too independent, the relative who was just disliked. My mother, Linda, she's always been the emotional thermostat of the house. When she's warm, everyone relaxes. When she's frigid, everyone gets tight. Today, she was ice cold. My father, John, stared intently at his plate, rearranging his green beans as if trying to build a tiny shield. My older brother, Mark, pretended to be absolutely engrossed in his phone, though I could see the screen was dark. And my younger brother, Jake, he was grinning into his wine glass, half amused, half delighted. It was like he'd been waiting years to see me finally lose my glory, as he probably called it. I knew, deep down, that they had all constantly, covertly benefited from me. Mark called me every time he needed legal assistance, always with some urgent, dramatic crisis. I paid Mason's tuition when Jake couldn't or wouldn't, and I stayed quiet about my parents' bills, which always seemed to be rising, while pretending not to notice their new vacations or unnecessary luxuries. I did it because I believed family members should support each other. I didn't want them to suffer, so I always stepped in. But mostly, I did it hoping it would prove I belonged, despite the facts always showing otherwise. As a child, I didn't understand that my mother was referring to me when she'd say, "Strong women carry the family on their backs." My brothers? They never learned accountability from her. They learned how to pass it off. And they did, repeatedly. This was love, I'd tell myself, a mantra I repeated for years. But as I sat there, the echo of her words, "Stop relying on the family," ringing in my ears, something inside me began to reorganize. Perhaps it never had been love, not truly. The math just didn't add up anymore. I took a slow sip of water, allowing the metallic taste to linger on my tongue. All around me, conversations resumed in hurried, uneven bursts, as if everyone was anxious to pretend nothing had happened. But something irrevocable had happened, and I knew this wasn't the start of a collapse. Not really. This was clarity, just getting started. The rest of the lunch felt like waiting for a storm. Everyone pretended not to notice. The sound of forks tapping plates felt a little too quick. My father's breathing became labored every time my mother shifted in her seat. Jake seemed to be enjoying some private performance, his knee bouncing subtly beneath the table. I didn't say anything, not out of fear, but because sometimes silence can reveal a person's true nature. Linda spoke as though nothing had occurred. She made casual remarks about the neighbor's new fence, the perfect temperature of the rolls, the beautiful glaze on the ham. She didn't even glance at me. That was her way. She didn't blow up. She deleted you. And being erased by your own mother, that hurts differently than any insult. Finally, Mark broke the silence. Mom's right, Val. He mumbled, his gaze fixed on his plate. You've been distant. Maybe this is for the best. Distant. That's a word people use when they've conveniently forgotten the last 4 times you showed up for them. I didn't reply. I just watched him shift uneasily, my silence speaking louder than any response I could have given. Then Jake added his voice, dramatically swirling his wine. If you're struggling, just say that. No shame in needing help. Needing help? From them? I nearly chuckled. But Linda interrupted me again before I could speak. Her voice, gentle yet piercing, cut through the air. Evelyn, sweetheart, we can't keep pretending everything is fine. You rely too much on this family. It's time for you to grow up. There it was. The entire line, the one that would ruin everything. She'd said stop relying on the family before. But this time, she spoke slowly, deliberately, as if she wanted to ingrain every syllable in my very bones. And what she said wasn't even the worst part. It was how the others let it fall. Nobody resisted. No one asked her to stop. Their quiet wasn't confusion. It was consensus. Something clicked into place inside of me at that very instant. Not broken, not shattered. Snap implies mayhem. This was more like a key turning in a lock, pure clarity falling perfectly into place. I excused myself to the restroom. Not to hide, to breathe. Inside, I could hardly recognize the woman in the mirror. Not because she was worn out or older, but because she had finally come to terms with the reality. This family wasn't pushing me out. I had never actually been admitted. They barely noticed when I returned to the table. No one looked up when my chair gently scraped the floor. Not even Mom. That was the moment that changed me. I grabbed my coat and draped it over my arm. When Linda finally looked at me, it was with displeasure, not concern, as if I had interrupted her. Where are you going? She asked. I met her steady, serene gaze. Home. Her expression briefly flickered, a hint of confusion, perhaps even fear, before she shut it down. I walked to the front entrance, unchallenged. They didn't understand yet, but they would. The dining room had never felt as clear as the chilly air outdoors. I didn't trust myself to give them even a last look. So, I walked to my car without turning around. Not out of pride. That wasn't theirs to earn. When I unlocked the door, my hands felt more stable than they had in years. By the time I arrived at my downtown apartment, the numbness had subsided, replaced by a calmer, more determined resolve. The kind that comes from finally telling yourself the truth, rather than from pure rage. I went inside, shut the door, and let the quiet settle around me. My home had always been a refuge. But that evening, it felt different. It seemed to be waiting for me to decide. I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I went to my bedroom, pulled out a suitcase, and started packing. Not to go anywhere, just to signal the end of something. Each folded item of clothing took on a symbolic meaning. Every pair of trousers, every top, felt like a line being drawn. The gentle hum of the zipper was a reminder that I was still in charge, at least of myself. I packed with a slow, serene pace. No hurry, no panic, just clarity. I opened my laptop beside the glowing screen, which cast a chilly blue hue over the room. One by one, I opened the tabs I hadn't even thought about in years. Utility payments for my parents. Cabin maintenance costs. Tuition assistance. Every contribution I had given over the years. It was like watching a lifetime turn into a set of rounded, unquestionable totals, all in one place. My cursor hovered over the autopay options. Then, out of necessity rather than resentment, I canceled them. They had told me to stop relying on my relatives. So I did, as literally and logically as possible. The next task was the cabin. I had paid for the internet, the gas, the water, all while never receiving a holiday invitation to a place they claimed as their own. As I clicked through each account, ending what shouldn't have started, I covered the expenses. Cancel, cancel, cancel. Every confirmation email was like a breath I had been holding for decades. But the final piece of evidence came when I opened a folder I hadn't looked at in years, the cabin transfer documentation. My lawyer, bless his meticulous soul, had insisted I include a reversion clause. At the time, I'd agreed because it seemed wise. Now, it felt prophetic. The clause stated that ownership would immediately return to me if the property was ever contested, if my parents tried to exclude me from choices, or violated the rules in any manner. Just a straightforward legal consequence. No argument, no compromise. I relaxed in my chair and let reality sink in. They believed they were in control. They believed I was the one who needed them. But the reality had always been the reverse. The room became dark as I shut down the laptop, save for the city lights outside. It wasn't retaliation. Not quite yet. It was preparation. Because everything was about to change, and I would be ready. The instant they understood the true meaning of my quiet. My phone didn't ring for 2 days. Not out of worry or regret. Out of a sense of entitlement. Then, Jake's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring twice before answering, giving him just enough time to notice the pause. Without even a pretense of politeness, he yelled, "Evelyn, what the hell did you do? The cabin's freezing, the heat won't kick on, and the internet's down. Mason was supposed to go up this weekend. Then he'll have to stay home," I replied quietly. "What is your problem?" he shrieked, disbelief lacing his voice, as if I had broken some unwritten pact to help him indefinitely. "I stopped paying for things I don't use," I answered. There was a thick, angry, perplexed stillness. Then he launched into a rant about sacrifice, duty, and family loyalty. It's funny how those words only come out when someone wants something from you. I let him continue for a moment. Then, letting out a sigh, I said, "You told me to stop relying on the family. So I did." And I hung up. Jake wasn't the next caller. Mark didn't send a text. My father left me a breathy, quiet voicemail, asking if we could have a grown-up conversation. The tone was familiar, desperate, thinly disguised as logical. They weren't concerned about me. They were concerned about the consequences of my absence. 2 more days passed, and it intensified. My mailbox held a bulky envelope. Inside was a petition my mother had filed, asking the court to examine the cabin transfer. She claimed emotional distress, said she hadn't comprehended the terms, and demanded the property be returned to her and my father. The legal seal and return address were from a city law office. I sat at my kitchen island, reading the papers in an almost buzzing quiet. They hadn't even made the initial call to me. They immediately tried to take something that wasn't theirs. By decision, not by mistake or misunderstanding. That was all the confirmation I needed. I called my lawyer that afternoon, as soon as the line became clear. He shook his head, blew out his breath through his nostrils, and glanced over the papers. "They have no case," he said. I thanked him, not because I was happy, but because I finally felt certainty, something solid under my feet after years of bending and breaking for everyone else. The reversion clause ensures ownership returns to you automatically if they act against the agreement. They filed this petition, which means they triggered the clause themselves. So, the cabin is yours again, legally effective immediately. When my attorney recommended we set up a meeting with them, I picked the cafe next to the old neighborhood. You know, the one with the buzzing lights and peeling leather booths. It was public enough to prevent anyone from raising their voices, but familiar enough to keep emotions in check. They arrived together. Jake furious, Mark pale, John avoiding eye contact, and Linda rigid with outrage. I had already selected a rear booth. They moved across from me as if they were defendants walking into a courtroom. My mom was the first to speak. I looked at her face, seeing only frustration that her plan had failed, not a shred of regret. "Evelyn, this has gone on long enough. You've made your point." "Mom," I said calmly. "You mean, you made your point? Cutting off the cabin? Because you blindsided us. I didn't file anything. You can't expect us to just do that." Her nostrils flared. "I didn't expect anything," I countered. "That's the difference between us." Before she could say anything more, I placed a large folder on the table. My own paperwork, not legal documents. It was proof of every silent sacrifice they'd chosen to forget. "What's this?" Mark asked in a feeble voice, glancing at the stack. 18 years of payments, I replied. Rounded sums, printed utility lists, home maintenance, tuition, support, repairs, medical costs. My father's gaze halted on the first page. He blinked. "You paid this much?" "Yes," I said. "For all of us." Jake scoffed, but it sounded unsteady. "Yeah, so what? You think you're some hero? We never asked you to." "No," I firmly interrupted, a distinct line appearing across the table between us. "You expected it. We are all burdened by the truth." I continued, composed yet methodical. "Mom told me to stop relying on the family. So I did. I stopped paying the utilities. I stopped covering the cabin. I stopped funding the lifestyle you built on the assumption I'd never walk away. My mom became even more rigid. No, she muttered. You're being dramatic. I slid another document across the table, the reversion clause. I'm being fair. For the first time in my life, my mother's face froze, and she looked scared. This is the legal agreement for the cabin. The moment you contested the ownership, everything reverted to me automatically. You didn't lose the cabin because of me. You lost it because you tried to take something that wasn't yours. It was as if someone had taken the script right out of her hands, leaving her standing on stage without a word to say. Her face went blank, vacant. Stunned, my father leaned back. Mark gazed at his hands. Jake's mouth opened and shut silently. They were unmasked, not simply shocked. I allowed the stillness to linger long enough for the gravity of the situation to become apparent. Then I spoke, in a quiet, almost gentle tone. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I should have drawn boundaries 18 years ago. You told me I relied on you, but you were relying on me. And now you'll have to rely on yourselves. My mom finally found her voice, brittle and tight. We're your family. I stood, straightening my coat. I loved you like family. I supported you like family. But you didn't treat me like one. I took out a solitary dollar from my wallet. It was a symbolic inheritance, reflecting exactly how they had handled my contributions. Small, unimportant, and utterly unappreciated. I placed it in the middle of the table. That's all that remains, I replied. Everything else I already gave, and you didn't even see it. Nobody moved. Not my mother, not my brothers, nor my father, whose expression shifted from blank to regret. But it was too late. I moved out of the booth. Evelyn, my mother called, her voice cracking slightly. I didn't turn around, but I paused just long enough to hear it. Some stories need a final line. This one needed the door closed. As I walked out, the diner bell softly rang, and the chilly air rushed in around me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel bad about leaving. I was liberated. The silence felt different in the days that followed. It wasn't the kind that results from exclusion. It was the type you earn after speaking your truth aloud for the first time. My apartment, in some way, appeared lighter. Soft streaks of early light fell on the counter, and for the first time in years, I didn't wake up anticipating someone else's crisis. My attorney confirmed the documents. Once more, the cabin was legally mine. A clean reversion, brought about by their own decisions. With no disagreement or loophole, he inquired if I wished to submit a further claim or seek damages. I didn't. To be real, justice didn't have to be loud. My father sent a brief email a week later. No guilt, no Bible passages, simply a statement that they were working things out. I'm hoping they were. Perhaps they would finally be forced to grow in ways they hadn't previously needed to, now that they'd lost the assistance they took for granted. That weekend, I went for a lengthy stroll down the river, allowing the chilly air to burn my cheeks. I felt lighter. I had finally let go of a burden I was never supposed to bear. Not because I had achieved anything grand. I hadn't left my family behind. I had just stopped letting myself go. Maybe they'll see why I drew the line in due course. They might not. But I've discovered that setting limits isn't a punishment. It's an invitation for people to meet you with the same level of respect that you have always shown them. And you proceed, even if they are unable to. Now that I'm officially my own, my life is calmer and more stable.